Hi, I'm Angie, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how to use the art kits that I made for the Calgary Arts Academy sale. So, this first video is about the materials. The first thing I want to talk about is the paint. So, as you'll see in the kit, I've put them in these little containers. So this is M.graham and Company watercolor paint. There are 3 colors. Now I chose these 3 colors. Well, as you can see, they're blue and yellow makes green, so they all work together very nicely. Sometimes if you have the 3 primary colors, of course you can mix more colors, but when they all go together, sometimes they can get very muddy, which is, if you're working with kids, or especially little kids, that can be unattractive. So I put these 3 colors together. The colors are transparent also, which is important because when they mix together, the tendency to become really muddy is less. And also I chose these colors because they're really pretty and they're fine just on their own. You don't necessarily need to mix them together to make really attractive colors. So I've put them in these containers all for a few reasons. One is that then you can, especially when you're working with little kids, you can pick and choose which colors to give them at a time. So sometimes when it's in a palette and there's a whole bunch of colors, little kids will just tend to go from one color to the next color and mix all the colors in the palette, get really excited, but very little ends up on the paper. So this way you can just give them one color at a time. You can also control which order you give them or which color order you use them. The other reason they're in here, the reason the lid is on here is basically so that you can store them easier. They are hard. I've let them dry, which is important. When they come in the tube, they are soft. So this is important, especially for people who have not a lot of experience with painting. They tend to use all the paint as if it's like a tempera paint or an acrylic pre-mixed paint. Whereas this paint, you need to add water. And when it's hard, see, like it's hard, this means that people won't be so tempted to use all the paint, because you really only need a tiny bit of paint. I was going to say it may look like a little bit of paint in here, but it's actually enough to do easily this project and probably many more. So the other thing, when you're storing these paints, keep them upright, because even though they're hard, they're a little bit sort of sludgy still, or sticky, and so over a long period of time they'll start to drip and then they'll end up in the lid and it won't be so easy to use next time. Of course you can still use it. And again, if you lose your lid, it's not critical. Obviously you don't want anything going in there and touching the paint because it's a bit tacky, but if you lose the lid, it's not a big deal. They can sit out like this for as long as you like. So these kind of paints are actually mostly pigment. There's not a lot of medium in there because it's watercolor paint. You use the watercolor as the medium to spread it around. It's actually made with honey, so if you're using this paint outside, sometimes you'll find the bees and the little flies can be attracted to it. That's no big deal. It's just kind of cute. But it is toxic in that, not that it's toxic to smell, but you don't want anyone eating it. So if you're working with little babies and they're in that stage of just wanting to eat the paint, I would suggest waiting a little bit longer, and when they're really little you can just use water and food coloring, because usually they just want to dip the brush into the water anyways. Okay, one last thing about these is some people get concerned because the paints get mixed up. So you're trying not to gouge the paints and dig in there and mix big clunks of paints with each other. That is not good. But if it's simply, someone's used one color, say a darker color, a blue, and then they've gone in to use the yellow and their brush wasn't quite cleaned, and the yellow's gotten all blue over the top surface of it, then you can take your yellow and just, once it's all dry, run it under the tap, under just a little bit of cold or lightly warm water, and it'll wash off the top surface of the paint, and you'll still be able to use the paint that's underneath. Now you don't want to blast it too much because then all the paint will be gone, and so you want to just remove the top layer in as little as possible. So in these kits, I've provided the paper. So these are sized to fit into the frame, which is a IKEA frame, a Reba frame, which is not supplied. But so this paper is Strathmore paper. It's 40 pounds, so it's nice and thick, you can see, and it should hold quite a bit of watercolor and water and really absorb. This kind of watercolor paper is really important. If you ever want to do any further painting with watercolor, I suggest you go to your art store and get the highest quality watercolor paper. My suggestion is that you get large sheets of the artist quality watercolor paper and rip it down to the size. It's not cheap, but it's a lot cheaper actually than trying to buy a block of high quality watercolor paper. Usually the blocks that are included in kits are not very high quality, and you'll be disappointed with the results. And the same thing goes for paints. Most kits I've come across are really low quality. I've had people come to my classes and say, can I bring this kit I got, and it wasn't cheap, and they try and use the paints and they can't achieve any of the effects that we achieve with the artist quality paints. So I would encourage you to go to an art store. Don't try and pick up things from Michael's, or not that I'm against Michael's, but for art supplies, go to an art store. Okay, so again, so this paper is made up of binding and then the paper pulp. And so you know sometimes when you use watercolor paper and you put a lot of water on there, the paper starts to crumble a little bit and turn into little bits. That's because you're using too much water, or you're rubbing too much with your brush. So little kids especially do this. So we have to encourage to be kind of gentle with the paper. And it will warp a little bit, but it shouldn't warp too much that it's still not possible to frame. So the brushes I've included, these are a very simple watercolor brush. I gave it a bigger brush, and if you're buying more brushes, I think bigger is better, because as you can see, this one comes down to a point. These round brushes come to a point. So you can actually get really fine detail with these brushes, but this part of the brush holds a lot of water. So that when you start painting and you're using the water, you're using your brush to gather water and include that in your picture, you're going to be able to do that. Little tiny brushes are very frustrating with watercolor paints. This is more like a Chinese brush. So this one is size 12, 10, 12, anywhere around that range is good. Again, I would go to an art supply store for your brushes, because the ones that you get in packs or the ones that you get in kid sets, first of all, you'll find a lot of times the hairs will fall out into your painting, which is annoying. But and sometimes the paint on the handle will chip. This part falls off. Also, they just don't. They're not as soft, and they don't absorb the water as much. So you can't achieve the same kind of effects. Also, so this is a synthetic brush, which is fine. You can also get many different types of animal hair brushes, but this one is just fine. Okay, so then as you can see, well, I don't know if you can see, but I've drawn on these pictures little very simple outlines that in pencil, which is erasable. I did these so that sometimes it helps to have an image on the paper, but please don't feel confined to that. This is not about painting within the lines. That's why the shape is so simple. There's lots of room to practice watercolor and just feel loose and enjoy. Some other things that you might want to use, I have a water spray bottle. This is fun, especially for kids and for adults too. You can achieve some effects. Of course, you get them at the dollar store or whatever. Obviously, you'll need water. I've got a glass of water here. And for older kids and sometimes adults, you might want to add patterns. You can get a pencil, eraser. When you're using pencil, that's fine. But on this paper and any paper, don't press too hard, because it'll leave a dent in the paper, and then if you want to erase it afterwards, you can't see it. One thing about using pencil is that the paint, when it goes over, even if it's a light wash, will make the pencil permanent, so it's difficult to erase afterwards. So if there's a line you don't want, erase it first. Okay, so I think that's all I have for this video, and please go ahead and watch the other videos, and please enjoy painting. Thanks.